Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something just absolutely mind-boggling, the staggering scale of history's greatest business empires. We're talking about organizations so massive, so entrenched, that taking them down seemed literally impossible. I mean, think about it. Throughout history, these colossal entities have controlled global trade routes, financial markets, factories, ports, entire industries. Their founders didn't just get rich, they became richer than kings. And the companies themselves? Well, a lot of times, they wielded way more power than actual governments. For generations, it looked like absolutely nothing could stop them. But that brings us to the central mystery we really need to unpack today. Because almost without warning, these seemingly invincible titans always, and I mean always, begin the collapse. Sure, some fall to war, others to debt, but so many of them succumb to a much quieter internal flaw. And that brings us to the ultimate strategic paradox. I want you to just sit with this for a second. What happens when the exact strategy that made you wildly successful simply stops working? They fall. It really is that stark and that absolute. No matter their immense size, their vast wealth, or their historical dominance, every single empire is vulnerable to this one fatal flaw. If you fail to realize that the world around you has changed, you fall. Section 1. The illusion of permanence. Long before modern corporations even existed, merchants were already building these enormous commercial networks. If we trace this all the way back to 1602 with the founding of the Dutch East India Company, jump forward to the shattering of Standard Oil in 1911, and then look all the way up to the tech giants of the late 20th century, you start to see a clear picture. This pattern of a spectacular rise followed by an inevitable fall, it's not some modern glitch. It's a universal, repeating historical cycle. Section 2. The danger of complexity. Let's look at the Dutch East India Company, because they were actually surprisingly modern. They didn't just sell products, they completely controlled supply and routes. They negotiated directly with governments, and they raised capital from investors. Pretty standard today, right? But here's the catch. They got enormous. And enormous organizations, they develop enormous costs. Maintaining fleets of ships, soldiers, forts, and administrators all across the globe require just astronomical amounts of money. Soon enough, pervasive internal corruption set in. The crushing administrative complexity ultimately destroyed their financial position, right up until they were formally dissolved in 1799. It perfectly illustrates this idea. Power creates complexity, and complexity eventually creates vulnerability. Think about that. The very structure of an empire, the sheer massive scale required just to maintain its power, naturally creates the very cracks that will eventually bring it down. Section 3. The fragmented empire. Now, John D. Rockefeller's strategy in the 19th century oil business was absolutely genius. By achieving 90% market control, Rockefeller understood something his competitors just missed. You don't actually need to own every single oil well to dominate the industry. Instead, you just need to control the most critical choke points of the value chain, things like refining, transportation, and storage. Standard Oil's immense scale drove down their costs, which drove up their profits, resulting in this overwhelming, unprecedented dominance. But then we hit 1911. This year marks a really critical turning point. Turns out, having 90% dominance attracts some pretty intense attention. Politicians got worried, and the public grew incredibly suspicious of all that concentrated corporate power. So, in 1911, utilizing antitrust laws, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in and ordered Standard Oil to be shattered into dozens of completely separate companies. Just like that, the monopoly was over. At first glance, it really looked like Rockefeller had lost the war, but the empire didn't truly disappear. Its economic DNA basically just fragmented into the modern giants we know today: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco. It goes to show that while an empire might get dismantled on paper, its foundation, its technology, and its methods often outlive its creator, acting as the bedrock for the next generation of business. Section 4. The trap of success. You see, the battlefield is constantly shifting across different eras. Back in the 19th century, the Rothschild family built this massive banking network, where their core advantage was simply the speed of information and capital moving across borders. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and the game shifts to industrial capitalism. Suddenly, companies like Ford and General Motors are winning through unprecedented industrial scale and structure. Then, in the late 20th century, Sony and other Japanese tech giants conquered global markets through sheer electronics innovation and quality. But here is the massive catch. Markets change a whole lot faster than physical factories do. Being excellent at solving yesterday's problems, yeah, that doesn't guarantee your survival tomorrow. Which brings up a really vital question for us. Why exactly do innovative giants struggle so much with tomorrow's problems? I mean, these are companies filled to the brim with brilliant people and endless resources. Why is it that the moment of their absolute greatest success is actually their most dangerous moment? Well, success creates a powerful, frankly blinding trap. When everything is working perfectly, leaders have absolutely no reason to question the system. Your massive profits, they just reinforce your existing assumptions. Your loyal customers, they just demand more of your existing products. Your employees get incredibly efficient at your existing processes. And your investors, well, they demand you stick to the exact strategy that's making them rich. The entire ecosystem ends up making the organization unbelievably good at the past, but completely blind to a rapidly changing market. And we've seen this trap spring shut time and time again throughout modern history. Take Kodak. They actually developed an early digital camera, but their massive existing film business made transitioning strategically agonizing. Or look at Blockbuster. They utterly dominated video rentals until streaming completely changed consumer expectations. Nokia was the largest mobile phone manufacturer on the planet, but smartphones entirely changed the definition of what a mobile phone even was. The problem for these giants wasn't necessarily ignorance. Actually, sometimes they saw the future coming perfectly clearly, but abandoning a deeply entrenched, highly profitable business model just because of sheer organizational weight. That is an incredibly difficult, painful decision for any leader to make. So, what we're left with is this inescapable, repeating life cycle for every business empire. Step 1, you build an advantage. Step 2, you aggressively expand it. Step 3, you protect it at all costs. Step 4, you inevitably become entirely dependent on it. And finally, Step 5, you are forced to face a world where that specific advantage no longer guarantees your survival. It happened to the Romans, the British, the Dutch merchants, the industrial giants, and today's modern corporations. The structures might look different, but this exact pattern remains identical. Section 5. The Art of Adaptation. We so often think of empires collapsing in some dramatic, cinematic explosion. But in reality, somewhere right now, a small startup is solving a problem that a giant corporation thinks is just unimportant. The fall actually begins incredibly quietly, with these microscopic little cracks. Maybe one customer chooses something else. A piece of technology gets just a tiny bit cheaper. A competitor finds a slightly better process. A regulation shifts. A highly talented employee leaves to start their own firm. One crack becomes two become 10, and by the time the monolithic empire actually realizes what's happening, the world it was built to dominate simply doesn't exist anymore. This presents the ultimate ultimatum that every single business leader eventually has to face. You have to weigh the warm comfort of your past success right up against the harsh, cold necessity of long-term survival. You're either protecting the world that made you successful, or you're building the organization that can survive the world that comes next. The most durable empires, companies like Toyota, Apple, or Amazon, they survive precisely because they inherently understand this cycle. They willingly accept short-term pain, they abandon profitable products, and they aggressively replace outdated systems to build for the future. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. The greatest lesson from history isn't just that empires fall. It's that no empire ever gets to stop adapting. Money can buy technology, and sheer size can buy efficiency, but absolutely nothing can buy permanence. So I want you to look at your own career right now, or the organization you work for. Ask yourself, which choice will you make when the world inevitably changes? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a powerful new perspective to chew on, and I really can't wait to dive into our next topic with you soon.